Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cover One Roundup here live most Mondays on the Cover One YouTube channel or subsequently wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, Kyle Silagyi, joined every week we do this show by David Fox, and today we are going to preview the Buffalo Bills offseason position battles. OTAs started today. What did they
did they?
I guess so. I read that they started today, but I saw not a peep from anyone that OTAs were going on.
OTAs are. This is literally exactly how OTAs work. Nobody knows when they happen until the day that they start, and everybody's like, "Oh, they started?
Right?
Oh, okay." And we don't really know anything, and they're not going to do anything. Yeah.
And that's what I was expecting to see today, but I saw nothing. Granted, I wasn't on Twitter that much, but. Maybe the Bills OTAs are going on. Maybe they're not. Who's to know? I guess we'll never know. The Bills OTAs may or may not be going on. So we're just going to be using that as a launching point to discuss the roster in general and potential position battles that could take place. Not so much in OTAs, more so a training camp. So we're just going to preview things that we think could happen. Maybe give some predictions about the potential position battles, or at least at this point in the offseason, who we foresee starting week one. Obviously, a lot can change between now and then, but we'll do our best to give you some insight moving forward or whatever. So, David, what's going on? How was your weekend?
Well, I spent my day off on Friday getting my tires replaced and then immediately got a flat tire. Like not even like 30 feet from the dealership. So that was fun.
That's incredible.
No, I'm doing fine. I'm fine now. It all got fixed, so
that's good. Hey, things happen for a reason, especially that tire. Whatever. I had what I would describe as a productive weekend, but what a lot of people would describe as an unproductive weekend, but they're nerds. So David, I don't know if you knew this, but there's a show coming out this week. It's called Obi-Wan. It's about a character from the Star Wars movies called Obi-Wan.
I'm not necessarily all too familiar with Star Wars or anything of that nature. It's
that guy. It's that guy. It's the one on the cover there.
This guy. Guy.
Well, I think they're both in it, but that guy's in it.
That guy. Yeah. Very unfamiliar, obviously. Definitely didn't read this book in less than a week or anything like that. Definitely not that.
Well, here's a show coming up. So yesterday I rewatched the first two Star Wars prequels just to kind of you're breaking shit over.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the bookshelves behind the curtain. It's fine.
I rewatched the first two Star Wars prequels. Not as bad as I remember them being.
Ooh, we're gonna start with hot takes. This is gonna very quickly become a Star Wars prequels
like Attack of the Clones
cast.
Kinda Attack of the Clones isn't great.
Here's
the
Phantom Menace might be one of the most unnecessarily overhated movies in like all of cinema.
Mm-hmm.
It is so much fun. It is probably arguably has
I wouldn't say fun.
Better CGI than about 95% of the crap you see come out on Disney Plus.
Oh, for sure.
Jar Jar looks better than She-Hulk.
Oh, for sure.
But nobody's going to argue with me on this. And the reason, really, truly, if we're going to get into like some like tinfoil hat conspiracy stuff here, the reason why it got so hated by reviewers and movie critics is because they're a bunch of snobs who were probably paid off mostly by big corporate Hollywood because they hated that George Lucas is an independent filmmaker who never made a movie in Hollywood. So,
incredible theory. Star Wars sucks. Okay, well, you're not going to like my pitch. I bring this up to say that I think at some point in the offseason we should do an episode where we compare the Bills to Star Wars characters and figure out who is who.
This is why I was put on this earth, Kyle.
The most obvious. I mean, not all episodes are going to be winners. Let's be honest, guys. Most of our episodes aren't. So if I can get away, or if we can get away with doing these Bills players are these Star Wars characters episode, Dawson Knox is Chewbacca. That's a gimme. That's a layup. Who else? I don't even know. See, that's why we need to do an episode. And Dave, I'm sorry, you might not tune into that one, but that episode's going to slap. That episode is going That episode's going to be one of the best ever. Obi-Wan. This podcast is sponsored by Obi-Wan. Coming out this Friday.
Get that sponsorship? I'm gonna like DM the official Star Wars account and at them like every day for this now.
They're simply not going to respond. But we can try it, dude. Okay. Buffalo Bills position battles. Let's talk about those because there are a couple that we could get into. But what I'm going to do is position this in such a way that we go down position by position. We talk about whether or not there is a position battle to be had, who's taking part of it, and ultimately what we expect to see throughout the offseason and who we think is going to win. So, quarterback. David, I don't know if you think there is a position battle at quarterback between Matt Barkley and Case Keenum, but even if you think there is a battle, I don't care to talk about it. So if it's okay with you, I'm just gonna move forward.
I think the real battle is between Matt Barkley and Josh Allen.
Oh.
I mean, clearly. Listen, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, especially because actually, no. I won't say that I had these thoughts, but prior to the 2019 season, there was someone that I talked to who may or may not have worked with a particular company and then on to some other professional sports organizations after their time together. But this person and I were talking, and they suggested that Matt Barkley should absolutely, unequivocally be the starter for the 2019 Buffalo Bills. Which I was not a Josh Allen fan after that first year. I thought that rookie year went as well as it could have, given who he was coming out of college and given the situation that he came into with that offense, which was absolute garbage. But the idea that Matt Barkley, who could not land a solid gig as a backup in the NFL, should be starting for an NFL team with like playoff aspirations was astounding to me. So shout out if you're watching this podcast, but I thought that was one of the most ridiculous things I ever heard in my life. And I put on a straight face, which was very difficult for me to do.
That sounds difficult. But Matt Barkley, I mean, he was Buffalo royalty at that point because he played himself into. I mean, it's still that one game in 2018 against the Jets, like 6 days after he signed or whatever, that is still getting him NFL gigs from time to time. Now with the Buffalo Bills yet again, but yeah, I don't think that's a position battle. I think it's pretty obvious that Case Keenum is going to be the backup. Matt Barkley's probably going to be on the practice squad. But maybe he pushes Josh Allen. Maybe this is the year Matt Barkley takes that leap that we've all expected him to take at some point in his career. So running back is an interesting position going in because it seems rather, I don't want to say cut and dry, but or set in stone, but it's the path to what I think we're ultimately going to get is laid out. And I think we're going to get a running back by committee thing, which is what the Bills have tried to do for a long time to varying degrees of success. But I feel like since 2019, since they cut Shady, they've kind of just committed to this running back by committee idea, which is what a lot of teams around the NFL do nowadays. But the running back by committee is what they try to do. And Singletary is going to be the 1A, at least entering the offseason here, or the training camp. Cook's going to be the receiving back, and then Zach Moss. It's we'll see what Zach Moss does. But so my question is, are we calling the running back situation a position battle because every guy who's presumably going to make the roster has such a clear and defined role? So is it a position battle, and do you see any room for movement for any of these guys?
I think the only question is really just going to be how much faith they put into James Cook early on, and whether or not they'll try to force Duke Johnson into that role first. Because obviously they felt like they obviously felt like they needed a receiving back, and they did, which is why they tried to get JD McKissick, and then he got flipped by Washington. And then they felt like they still needed, at the very least, an insurance plan in case someone in the draft didn't fall to them. So they signed Duke Johnson, and then they end up drafting James Cook. So it's very clear. I mean, they said it right after the draft. They're like, yeah, we drafted James Cook to be that receiving guy. We're going to experiment with him a little at wide receiver as well. You know, blah, blah, blah. But I wonder, because this regime has never been super willing to just hand out jobs to rookies in particular. I mean, yeah, that first year when Matt Milano was clearly the better player over Ramon Humber. I mean, it took a long.
I haven't heard in so long.
It took a long time for Sean McDermott to actually make that switch from Ramon Humber to Matt Milano, and
wow.
You know, and part of that, of course, is just that, you know, Milano was a 5th round rookie. But I mean, it was pretty clear the difference between Ramon Humber and Matt Milano, no matter how you looked at it. Regardless of that, I mean, you know, there are some guys who are the exception, like that same year, Tre'Davious White. I mean, immediate starter, cornerback 1, and played like 1 too. 2018, you had Tremaine Edmonds, who started at middle linebacker and was calling plays from day 1, which, I mean, for craziness and for that regime to be able to do that. But then you look at Josh Allen. They didn't want Josh Allen to start, but they made the mistake of thinking that Nathan Peterman could, and paid the price on that one pretty strongly. You know, this team does not necessarily hand out, you know, you go look at like AJ Epinesa as well, where it took a long time for him in his rookie year to get on the field. And unfortunately, it's kind of still taking him a long time just to get on the field. Yeah, it takes time for guys to really work their way into the starting lineup. So I wonder if they kind of want Duke Johnson to be the starter initially, and then maybe kind of work James Cook in. You know, a lot of that's just going to depend on how Duke Johnson looks in camp and how healthy he is and all that good stuff. But that's sort of my one hang up with this. And then the other, you know, Singletary is obviously the starter given the way he finished down the stretch. Zach Moss is, you know, we'll see what happens. And Tywan Jones is obviously a special teams guy. But with Duke and Cook, it'll be interesting to see what happens there, because, I mean, realistically, do we see this team carrying 5 running backs this season? It would make no sense. Absolutely no sense. So I don't know if Zach Moss would be a cut candidate, or maybe a trade or cut candidate. Or, I mean, Duke Johnson kind of seems like an easy cut candidate if, like, they feel really confident in James Cook. But that would be how I view that.
And then Dave wrote after I gave my little preamble there about the running back situation, I guess you could call it. What about Duke? Because I didn't mention Duke Johnson. I think as of right now, again, a lot can change in camp, or not so much OTAs, but camp more so in preseason. But as of right now, he's probably on the outside looking in, if you were to ask me. I think it's a situation like you brought up, David. He was an insurance policy in case the draft didn't fall their way at the running back position. And then just looking at how they got James Cook, I don't think they necessarily went into the draft looking at James Cook as a round 2 candidate. But I think as the board just kind of fell the way it did, they traded back and they were like, well, if we want to get him, this is kind of where we have to do it. And people have talked about the value, about was he worth a 2nd round pick? Well, you know, that's up to your personal interpretation, but they took him like 2 picks before the 3rd round, so it really doesn't matter. But I do think they went into the draft with Duke Johnson or what's his name, right? Duke Johnson.
Yes.
I'm forgetting names. Jesus, I keep trying to say Duke Williams because I'm a Bills fan, right? Gotta keep the Duke Williams dream alive.
Speaking of the 2019 Bills,
right? Yeah,
let's talk about Duke Williams.
Right, I got to keep that dream alive. Got to keep that hype train rolling. But
Duke Williams.
Right, Jesus. That's a point that if we were doing this podcast in front of 2019 or 2020 even, people would have ironically been like, no, yeah, Duke Williams can be the guy. But no, I do think Duke Johnson was an insurance policy should they not come out with one of the upper echelon running backs. And they just so happened to get the best running back at what Duke Johnson's role was going to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't think Duke Johnson, I mean, I guess he could come in and just kind of usurp Zach Moss, but as someone wrote here too, about how I personally think Zach Moss is going to take a massive step in the right direction. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see, but it does have to be remembered that Zach Moss was coming off of a late injury the year prior last year. So, and it takes a while to recover from injuries. And Zach Moss, I mean, you can argue like, well, that really shouldn't have bugged him all year. And he really was lackluster all year, which again, I can see that, but I do not. I don't want to say it's a competition because I do think it is going to be Singletary as the 1A, Cook coming in on passing downs, Moss, if he's not traded on roster cutdown day, probably as a short yardage back, but I don't see them go. And then they'll have Tywan Jones. So I don't think that Duke Johnson makes this roster. Maybe Zach Moss doesn't even make the roster, but I do want to bring up the possibility of James Cook potentially getting some 1A looks. I don't know if it's going to happen because I do think his role is very defined. And I wrote down here who has the most to gain and who has the most to lose. For me, the guy with the most to gain is James Cook because his role, he is the only Bill who can do what or the role that the Bills have carved out for him. He is the only Bills running back currently on the roster who can do that. You can say Duke Johnson is, but I mean, James Cook is probably a better receiving back than Duke Johnson. So, and I think the ways that they've talked about using James Cook, I mean, obviously he already has a defined role, but if he starts flashing as a running back, as a more traditional back, which really isn't something he had the opportunity to do all that much at Georgia, if he comes in and starts flashing as a potential lead back, which I don't know if he's ever going to be that, but if he does, he's starting to eat into Singletary's, Singletary snaps there a little bit. So just what are your opinions on James Cook? What is his ceiling in this offense? Is it as the potential lead back in a committee? Is it just the lead back, or is it, that what we expect or what we've kind of been talking about for months or weeks now with him just being that receiving back in situational packages or whatever?
Yeah, I think his ceiling really is probably going to be just lead back in a committee, because I don't know if he has the skill set to be just like a lone workhorse type of running back. And especially with how the Bills seem to approach the running back position, or at least how they've been doing it, has just been like, we're getting guys in specific roles so that we can keep guys fresh and available to be successful in those particular roles. I also feel like, if there was someone that they felt was like special and felt could be that lead back type of guy, they would go after that guy. Because I like one of the things that I like about Brandon Beane seemingly is that there is a process and a certain set of traits that I think they like in players and all that. But I think that they like leave room for openness and flexibility in terms of their process to be like, normally we have a committee approach to running back, but this player obviously is very different and could be, it's all very hypothetical, by the way, in case that wasn't obvious. But this player is very special and could be available with this pick or this money and blah, 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 blah. So we're going to take a different approach with this. So I think for James Cook in particular, I think his ceiling really is just going to be as a lead back in a committee, but I'm still would need to see more of him just as a runner to feel comfortable in that. And I think even regardless of that, I would still want someone to do more like short yardage type of stuff. Because I don't know if he necessarily has that type of like contact balance through, especially like really dense situations that would normally come in short yardage situations. So we'll see.
Most to lose. This I wrote down Zach Moss, but I mean, is Duke Johnson the most to lose just by, it's got to be Zach Moss, right? He's got to have the most to lose because he has the most, or at least more historic hype as a Buffalo Bill than Duke Johnson has ever had. Duke Johnson was just like at 7:30 in the morning or whatever they signed him, I remember, and I was just like, oh, okay, Duke Johnson, cool. But like with Zach Moss, I was a guy that was like, oh no, Zach Moss. Last year, beginning of the year, I was like, oh no, Zach Moss is the running back moving forward. I think he's better than Devin Singletary, and I think he has a higher ceiling. By the end of the year, it was clear that he is not better than Devin Singletary. Maybe doesn't have a higher ceiling. And so he really does. He's a guy who went in 1 year from last year entering this time of the year. It was like, okay, he could really push Singletary and be that lead back. To now, it's like, okay, he really needs to make some noise to even cement a roster spot. I think that he will ultimately make the roster, but again, it's not out of the question to ultimately see him get traded on roster cutdown day if he has a lackluster preseason and training camp, right? You can very easily imagine someone else's running back getting injured, or maybe, Singletary or Cook did when we're not talking about this, but you could very easily imagine some other team's running back getting injured and then trading a 6th round pick for Zach Moss. That's something that could very easily happen. Or, they keep Moss to just be that situational short yardage guy.
Brandon Beane managed to flip Russell Bodine to the Patriots for a 6th round pick, right? Or was it a 7th?
Whatever. It was
whatever it was. He didn't have to cut him, which is absurd. Like, that's still funny to me. Russell Bodine. That poor bastard.
Russell Bodine was... Remember Russell Bodine and Ryan Groy? That's what.
Remember when everyone thought Ryan Groy was going to be awesome?
Yes, I thought he was going to be.
I thought he was going to be awesome too.
He showed indications. He showed indications of awesomeness.
He sucked.
And that's why I think it's funny. Like, I had a conversation with my friend a couple months ago before the free agency, I guess, or the start of free agency, when we were deep in discussions about how the Bills should restructure the cap, free up some cap space. And my friend was like, they should just cut Mitch Morris, free the $8 million, and then get a bargain bin free agent. And it's like, why do you actively want to go back to the days of Ryan Groy and Russell Bodine? Why are we yearning for those days? I don't.
Why are we okay? Why are fans? Can we, no, like, this is hypothetically speaking. This is not necessarily insulting. I'm not trying to call out anyone in the chat. Why are fans so like fixated on making rosters worse just to save a little money? It's not your money.
That's the thing. I always say, like, it's not my money. Spend it however, spend to the cap. I don't care.
You are the fans here. You should be coming up with the most bizarre, insane scenarios that I have to be like, hold on, this really isn't that realistic. Maybe a piece here or two, but like, this is not going to work. But like, you should not be sitting there like an accountant, like,
trying to save this billionaire's money. I don't care. Spend your money. That's how you got here, right? You spend money on the team.
I'm not here to be the accountant for the Pagula fortune, as much as I would love to be able to do that, because I'm sure that pays quite well. But it's just like, everybody, so many fans are so freaking obsessed with just trying to save a bunch of money by cutting a player that doesn't need to be cut. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
Right. Why have Mitch Morris when you can have Russell Bodine and $6 million? It's like, are you seeing the $6 million? Like, are you his agent now?
Honestly, are you getting like a percentage of that?
Right.
Like, what?
My friend could have been Russell Bodine's agent. That wouldn't have shocked me. But right, we're yearning for those days because that's not the comment. I clicked the wrong comment. Okay, whatever. Does that sum up the running back situation? Like the ceiling, the likely scenario is Singletary as the 1A, Cook as the situational guy, Moss as the third down. Are they going to have 4 active running backs on game day?
Probably not every game, right?
I don't think so.
I there might be some situations where they say, let's have 4 running backs available, depending on if someone is hurt but still wanting to play or whatever. I don't know, but this team has pretty much only carried 2 running backs at a time, right? 3 if you want to count Taiwan Jones, but I would be surprised if they started going 3 or 4 really. That's a lot of running backs for a team that does not run the ball very much.
Yeah.
And one of those running backs would essentially be a receiver for most of that. So I don't know. This is also the team that for the last 5-6 weeks of the season only went with 1 active tight end on game day.
Yeah, no, we're going to talk about that later, about tight end 3, right? Because that's a roster spot that probably doesn't exist, but we're going to talk about it. And now that I'm thinking about it, Zach Moss is a really nice, really emergency running back. If something were to happen to Singletary or Cook, I like the idea of having Zach Moss there. Obviously, very different player than those two, but I like the idea of having Zach Moss there as an insurance policy. But I like Duke Johnson as an insurance policy too, and Zach Moss probably has more trade value at this point. So I do think we're going to see a combination of Singletary and Cook as the lead. As the committee, that's going to be the committee that we talk about to, the how the snaps are ultimately divvied up. You're probably going to see Singletary have more, but I mean, Cook, if he has a strong camp, could steal some snaps, and then whoever fills out the depth chart, it's going to be based off of probably the trade market and what happens in the rest of the league. Yeah. Moving on, wide receiver. There's an actual competition here, and it's happening in the slot, right? We have Diggs on one outside, Davis on the other. Those are your 2 pillars, if you will. And then in the slot, you have a very interesting competition that there's a clear-cut favorite, but there's also 2 interesting names to bring up, 3 even, if you want to talk about Marquez Stevenson, which I personally do not. But we'll talk about let's talk about the slot here. Jamison Crowder, who 2 things can be true. He can be a Band-Aid who is likely only going to be here for 1 year, in all likelihood will only be here for 1 year, and also be the best option in the slot right now because he is a very underrated slot receiver. When the Bills signed him, it happened 10 minutes before our podcast. We were very excited, right? Yes. Because a different player than Mckenzie and Khalil Shakir. Jamison Crowder is a very polished route runner, just a polished receiver in general, good hands. I like the idea of Jamison Crowder in the slot with Josh Allen. Josh Allen loves slot receivers too. Loves receivers over the middle of the field in general. Dawson Knox last year, but look at what Cole Beasley did in his first 2 years with Josh Allen. Probably was the best slot receiver in the league. So we'll see what Jamison Crowder is able to do with a quarterback. Can he stay healthy? That'll be interesting. He's missed games in 4 out of the last 7 seasons. So that's not a great track record, right? No, in more than half of his seasons, you can't get half of 7, but you know what I'm talking about. In more than half of his seasons, he has missed time. But I do think if he's able to stay healthy, he will be the slot receiver throughout the year. And I think that he's going to, play very well with Josh Allen. We should also talk about Isaiah Mckenzie and Khalil Shakir, because Isaiah Mckenzie, a lot of people have been pounding the table for Isaiah Mckenzie to get snaps in the slot for a long time now. And the one time that he did get the opportunity to show himself in the slot to prove himself, he played very well against the Patriots, had how many touchdowns, how many yards. So that kind of put a damper on guys like me who were like, no, Isaiah Mckenzie, probably shouldn't be a starting slot receiver. You probably shouldn't go into the season banking on him to be your starting slot guy. And then he does that in his one opportunity as a starting slot receiver. And it's like, oh, great. So, but even that being said, Mckenzie, very good in what the Bills typically ask of him. But like, I don't know if he's a polished enough receiver to be a full-time starting slot receiver. And then Khalil Shakir, again, we've talked about this on the podcast in the past. He might be hard to keep off the field, but what's interesting about him is that the versatility. You can line him up really wherever you want. Brett Coleman put out a great video about Khalil Shakir the other day, called him Diet Debo, which is an incredible nickname, maybe the best nickname on the team. There's Penguin for Tim Settle or whatever, and then there's a couple of good nicknames. Diet Debo is a good nickname though.
Diet Debo is solid nickname.
I don't know if like I were in the NFL, I would want to be the diet version of someone else.
Oh yeah. I mean, especially if that someone else is one of the greatest, most versatile players, maybe in the entire NFL history.
It's alliterative. But yeah, Shakir, I don't see him starting week 1 in the slot. I would bet money on him not starting in the slot week 1. I would probably bet on him not overtaking Crowder or Mckenzie on the depth chart throughout the season. But he is going to play offensively. Just again, I urge you guys to go watch Brett Coleman's video on Khalil Shakir that he put out the other day. Just like the things he can do, not only like with himself as an asset, like what he can do when he has the ball in his hands, but his versatility allows the Bills to line him up in specific, in really any spot on the field, which can then allow them to create mismatches elsewhere. He gave this really great example about like a situation where they kick James Cook out wide and then bring Shakir back to the backfield, which then forces the defense to go back to a single high safety look, which it was a very good video. But Khalil Shakir does allow the Bills to do a lot of fun stuff offensively, but I don't foresee him being the starting slot receiver. So David, week 1 starting slot, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I'm thinking Jameson Crowder as well. He brings the experience and steadiness that they want, especially when you're transitioning to a new offensive system with Ken Dorsey and Aaron Cromer and Joe Brady. I think that Shakir is going to find his way onto the offense at some point throughout the season. But you do have to earn your way onto this offense, and you have to earn the trust of Josh Allen. And if Josh Allen wants you to play, you're going to play. But the whole Isaiah Mckenzie thing is always just going to be fool's gold, essentially, just because that one game against the Patriots looked so good on paper, but it was really just a total failure of the Patriots to adjust to what the Bills were doing with Mckenzie in that game, where they just kept running those deep crossers with Mckenzie against that one DB who just could not keep up with him at all. And they just never adjusted for that. And it gave Mckenzie a lot of opportunities, and he made a lot with those opportunities. It wasn't just a bunch of wide open catches or anything. He made some really great plays, but one game does not a player make. If that were the case, Nick Foles would be starting in Indianapolis right now.
Which he might, man. Matt Ryan might not be it. Nick Foles might be better than Matt Ryan. People are talking.
Anyway, so I think you just killed my brain with that one for a minute there.
Hey, that happens every week, right? There's always some comment every week that gets it done.
So, but with I think Crowder's just going to bring that that steadiness that they want out of that position right now. I don't think Crowder has a super high ceiling that maybe someone else like a Khalil Shakir would, or maybe even Isaiah McKenzie. Like theoretically, Isaiah McKenzie has a nice ceiling, but it's just like at this point, if he was going to reach it, he was going to reach it, and he hasn't. So he just is who he is.
But the opportunity, David, hasn't been there. He's had Cole Beasley in front of him, clogging up the depth chart.
I know, and there's a reason for that. Like,
did you listen to the Cole Beasley album? Sorry, tangent, but did you listen to the album?
heck no. What kind of question is that? What did I listen to Cole Beasley's
Has anyone in
rap
chat
album?
listened to the
No.
Cole Beasley album? I haven't had the chance to listen
I
to
don't,
it yet.
Kyle, I don't hate myself that much.
Someone had to have Are you telling me that Cole Beasley put out a whole rap album and not a single person listened to it?
Hold on, let's be clear. Someone listened to it.
Who?
Probably Cole Beasley and his agent, but
let me continue about the slot. I need to see how many streams his new album has.
So with the slot, I mean, like I said, Jameson Crowder is going to bring a lot of steadiness and sure-handedness that you want out of that position. I think that Shakir's going to find his way probably on like 4 wide receiver sets where you have, Diggs and Davis on the outside and then probably Crowder and Shakir on the inside. You could also see Mckenzie on those sort of sets. It just kind of depends on what that situation would be, what they're running, et cetera, all your typical offensive game planning type of stuff. But I think I really like the Khalil Shakir in this offense. I can't imagine that someone of his talent and ability is just not going to contribute at all this year. And of course, some of that might just be by default if Jameson Crowder can't stay healthy, which we've talked about. I mean, that's not a guarantee, obviously. So I think that, I think that when Khalil Shakir gets this opportunity this year, and I do think he will get more than one, I think he's going to really be a big contributor for this team. It's going to be pretty exciting. And it's still exciting that they got this guy in the 5th round. Of all places to get a wide receiver in the 5th round, especially this type of wide receiver who is this good, this talented, and many people thought was like a surefire day 2 type of guy. That's crazy.
So you think that he has the most to gain? That's what I wrote down here.
Yeah, I think he does.
Right, because he is going to make his way onto the field eventually. As you said, he's too talented not to. And I do think the Bills have an idea for him offensively. People are talking about him potentially being a returner. I don't think he did that much at Boise. I think that's kind of I think I'm guilty of it. That might be an overstated part of his game. But I do think they have an idea for how to use him offensively moving forward, at least in the initial part of the season. And then by the end of the year, maybe he's just too good to keep off the field. But again, to start the year, I think we're looking at Crowder and then as the starting slot, Shakir as that situational gadget guy. Where does that leave Mckenzie?
I mean, they signed Mckenzie to a 2-year deal, which I thought was surprising. I mean, like any other deal in the NFL, it's really mostly just a 1-year deal, and they can kind of get out of that with minimal issues in 2023. I think they pretty much any other position, they like to have their insurance and they like to feel good about like, hey, we've got our eye on this rookie for the future, but we're trying to make a Super Bowl run right now. So we know what Isaiah McKenzie is and what he can do. So let's just keep him here and make it work with what we got. But it may just be by the end of the season that Isaiah McKenzie just doesn't have a particularly big role on this roster. And maybe all he does is just return punts and kicks, which maybe that will be a way to solve his issues if that's the only thing he has to focus on. But who knows?
Well, it's so interesting, right? Because you look at like the things that it's hard because like I don't want him as the punt/kick returner. Jameson Crowder is probably a better returner, but if he's starting in the slot, then I don't necessarily want Jameson Crowder returning either. Maybe Shakir, maybe Stevenson, but I don't really see Stevenson making this roster either. It's just like he's not as polished of a receiver as Crowder. He's not as versatile of a piece as Shakir. So just what he does long term here. I don't know if he does have a long-term future. Again, he signed a 2-year deal, which is surprising, but I don't know. It is going to be interesting because like right now it's maybe like borderline game day active spot.
Yeah, I mean, and this is sort of it's the tough part of having a good team. especially a good team that really was just built from the ground up, is that sometimes you get a guy like Isaiah Mckenzie who has worked his way onto this roster and has fought to stay on this roster every year. And has truly, genuinely earned that spot every year. Like he does some really great stuff every year, but at a certain point, there's just always going to be another guy. As Qui-Gon Jinn says, when going through the core, there's always a bigger fish. And Khalil Shakir might be the Sando Aqua monster to the OPC killer that is Isaiah Mckenzie.
Another podcast was saying Buffalo might just sign OBJ. Hey, you know, whatever.
We're not saying it. Another podcast is.
No, I'll say it. I'll say it. Buffalo should sign OBJ. Why not? It's not my money, David. We'll go back to them. I don't need them to save
This isn't about money. This isn't about money. This is about OP Senior coming up with some like editorialized video about, oh, this is Josh Allen missing throws.
No, he was fine once he got a good quarterback. I mean,
I listen, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying that Odell Beckham Sr. was wrong. I'm just saying it's really dumb and annoying. And
it reminds me, people go to bat for Baker Mayfield.
It reminds me just so much of like high school parents. Like when my roommate for the last couple of years was coaching at our high school alma mater. There was one game where one of the parents of the kid was like chanting, "Give the ball to Curtis." And I was just like, oh my gosh. You're such a prick. I was after the third time he started, I was like this close to just seeing like, hey, you are annoying everyone here. Shut up. But I didn't.
You know, no, you should have.
I should have. I wish I had, honestly.
I will. I go to every sporting event I go to with the intent of getting kicked out. So that's just how you should operate. Are you
successful in those endeavors?
I've never been. I don't think I've been kicked out of anything.
You don't think? Okay, we're not diving into that. Legally speaking,
moving on. I appreciate
as your lawyer, Kyle, I'll advise you to not go any further.
I appreciate the out. And then just looking at the bottom of the depth chart, because I don't think Mckenzie is in jeopardy of losing his roster spot by any means, because he's again been here for longer than Ken Dorsey at this point. I think he'll stick around. Again, at the very least, he's a nice insurance policy. I think his role will probably end up being bigger than that, but at the very least, he's a good insurance policy. But after receiver, 5? After Shakir, if we're counting him as receiver 5, do we foresee them carrying a 6th, a 7th? Jay Kumro's probably the best bet, but there are discussions to be had about the likes of Marquez Stevenson, who we really didn't get to see him do much last year. I think he returned a punt or two, but nothing really incredible after having a nice preseason where he shined a little bit. Again, as people were talking here in chat, has the ability to take the top off the defense. We just really haven't seen him do it yet in the NFL because the opportunities haven't been there. And Isaiah Hodgins, who was another guy who had a lot of hype coming out of, I think it was the 2020 draft, the Gabe Davis draft. Yeah, there were some people, me included, who were more excited about the selection of Isaiah Hodgins. I think he was in the 7th. I'm more excited about the selection of Hodgins than Davis. Obviously, I was wrong, which I am about
things
a lot
change.
Of things, but
things change.
Hodgins hasn't been able to get on the field, whether it be through injuries or just the depth charts loaded in front of him. Really hasn't had the opportunity to show what he can do. So, David, in your opinion, how is this receiving core going to shake out? Are they fighting for a roster spot that doesn't exist? The likes of Stevenson, Kumro, Hodgins, and the rest of the guys at the bottom of the depth chart?
I wouldn't say they're fighting for a spot that doesn't exist. I just think that it's going to be very, very, very difficult for someone to. I think it's going to be difficult for someone like Stevenson to usurp someone like Kumro. Because there are now multiple guys that can do sort of what they want Stevenson to do. One of those guys is Mckenzie. And they certainly feel much more confident in Mckenzie than they do in Stevenson. But someone like Jake Kumaro, even though he may not bring the same sort of athletic ability that some of these other options might have, it's just another special teams guy. We know how much this team values special teams, and they should, because bad special teams can cripple and destroy even the best teams in the NFL. But I just, it's really difficult to make those comparisons because they do different things. And last year, I mean, people were talking about Jake Kumaro having like the training camp of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what did he do in the actual regular season that he hadn't done in previous years? He dropped the touchdown against the Patriots, right?
He did, yeah. No, you put on the tinfoil conspiracy hat earlier about Star Wars. I'll put it on now. That was Brandon Beane going to the lamestream Buffalo media and saying Aaron Rodgers is sad. He's crying to the media up there in Green Bay. I need you guys to make it look like Jake Kumaro is actually the second coming of Jesus, not just touchdown Jesus. He is the actual dude, so that he'll give me a 5th round pick for him.
I kind of love that.
Whatever.
I love that. I'd buy that. I buy that.
I got sources. The sources are just me. I made it up, but per sources, that's exactly what happened. But yeah, no, if they are going to carry a 6th, see, part of me doesn't want to give up on the Isaiah Hodgins hype train.
Here's the thing. Like there's a distinct possibility that Isaiah Hodgins is cut and is brought back on the practice squad.
Oh, for sure. That's probably his ceiling.
Because I think they did that last year, didn't they? Where like, I mean, if Isaiah Hodgins was the guy that I think a lot of people want him to be, if he was, I'm not 100% sure if he was actually cut last year, but I think he was. If there's someone who really thinks they can do something with Isaiah Hodgins, they're going to go get him. But I don't think that was really ever the case. And it kind of just feels like, August 31st, Hodgins was waived from the Bills and re-signed to the practice squad the next day.
So they're not okay.
If there was someone who wanted him then, they should have gotten him, and they would have. But I feel like this is, every fan base does this. Every fan base has their guys that they kind of latch onto. We all know that. Isaiah Hodgins just might not be as good as we want him to be. For a 7th round receiver. And Isaiah Hodgins had a good career at Oregon State. But
it's hard because we haven't seen him do anything.
Right.
Like he hasn't had the opportunity to do anything. He just hasn't done anything, which is why it's hard to give up hope, because it's like we haven't been confirmed in our biases or whatever, and we also haven't been disproven. So it's just kind of like I had this hype 2 years ago. Let's see if it's still sticking around. But I think if there is going to be a 6th receiver, it's going to be Kumaro. So I think that wraps up receiver talk, right? Crowder in the slot, Kumaro number 6.
47 minutes in, we are through 2 positions.
Well, now we're going to talk about an undrafted free agent, baby, the tight end position. So last year, as you kind of alluded to earlier, David, toward the end of the season, they were rolling with 1 active tight end every week. I think they only had 2 tight ends on the roster for most, if not all, of the season, in Dawson Knox and Tommy Sweeney. In the offseason, they kind of changed their not offensive identity, but like they bring in Dorsey and they bring in Aaron Cromer, both of whom have experience in offenses that like to run 2 tight end sets. You're not running those with Dawson Knox and Tommy Sweeney, so they go out there and get O.J. Howard, which, I mean, that is a very fun potential 2 tight end set now with Dawson Knox and O.J. Howard. But I do want to talk about the potential for a 3rd tight end. I'd like to make it clear that I don't think they carry 3 tight ends, right? I think if they were comfortable carrying Dawson Knox and Tommy Sweeney, I think they're more than comfortable carrying Dawson Knox and O.J. Howard and then having a guy or 2 on the practice squad. But I do want to talk about Jalen Weidermeier, because this is a guy that, like, 6 months ago was getting 1st round buzz, kind of looked at as tight end 1 in this class, goes out to the combine, has like a historically poor performance, drops out of the draft entirely. But it's a guy who, you read a lot of people, you read respected analysts, and they're like, or you listen to respected analysts, and people are like, yeah, the tape doesn't suggest that he's this poor of an athlete, and the tape also doesn't suggest undrafted tight end either. So the fact that he dropped out of the draft and then the Bills sign him, look, he might beat. The issue is that I could see him performing better in training camp and in preseason than Quentin Morris, right? That's a guy I wrote it down here. I can't find the name. And then, Quentin Morris and Tommy Sweeney. But just given how deep this roster is, I don't know if they keep 3 tight ends. The only way that I see Jalen Weidermeier making this roster, again, I think he's a practice squad lock pretty much. I think that they very much like the idea of like, okay, this is a developmental tight end to long-term, but where is that development going to take place? If he shows out this preseason and training camp, they might have to keep him on the 53 just because some other team will sign him. Or, more realistically, he's a practice squad player. So will they carry 3 tight ends next year? And will it be Jalen Weidermeier?
I would think they carry 3 tight ends. And again, it might not be every week where they go with 3 tight ends. I do think that the kind of wild card here is Reggie Gilliam because he was a former tight end and they're now using him as a fullback. Mm-hmm. You could kind of get away with like, hey, we can use him. We can like list him as a fullback, but if we need to use him in tight end, especially in tight end 3 positions where you need 3 tight ends on the field, like that's a very easy sort of, we can insert you in that way. But I mean, to me, like Knox is 1, Howard is 2. That's pretty easy. I think if they do keep 3 true tight ends on this team, Tommy Sweeney just isn't going to be it. No. And I think Quentin Morris, what is he really? Like at this point, like I really would rather take the mystery box of Jalen Weidermeier than, Quentin Morris, who just hasn't really done a single thing in the NFL. Spin coming in, Doyle.
Touchdown
Tommy.
Maybe he is. He has more NFL touchdowns than Jalen Weidermeier. So
that is in fact an accurate statement.
Sad. What are you going to do? I refuse to devote more than 5 minutes talking about the Jalen Weidermeier on this show. I like Jalen Weidermeier. I like the idea, but I thought we were going to be kind of pushing to get to an hour this week. We are pushing an hour right now, and we are not
better than that.
We're not past the offense. So Jalen Weidermeier, I would love to talk more about him. Maybe next week will be the Jalen Weidermeier episode. But until then, we'll move on to the offensive line, David. Shockingly, I could not identify a position battle on the offensive line, at least not for a starting job. Maybe there are a few depth guard battles. Maybe, you want to talk about Alec Anderson. I think his name is pushing someone for a roster spot. But I think on the line, you're set with Dawkins, Saffold, Morse, Bates, who they just paid, and then Spencer Brown. And then they have depth at both tackles. They have Tommy Doyle. They don't have good depth, but they have depth. Tommy Doyle, Quisenberry, who they signed this year. And then they Greg Mance is a depth guard. Cody Ford is a depth guard. They have, guys on the offensive line. They have their starting 5, and then they have at least a backup at every position. Do we talk about Cody Ford potentially pushing Ryan Bates, or is that kind of like,
I don't think there's a realistic scenario as it stands right now where Cody Ford is pushing anyone for a starting position. That being said, I was kind of thinking about this earlier this week. There's been issues with how this team has, with McDermott and Bean, sort of gone about the offensive line in particular. I think people tend to bring up like trading away Wyatt Teller for a pair of 5th-round picks when he ends up being, an all-pro caliber type of guard with Cleveland. And then they draft Cody Ford in the second round, and they try him at right tackle, and then they try him at guard, and then they try him at a different guard, and he's just kind of terrible. Brandon Beane kind of spoke earlier. It may have been after the draft or some other time in the offseason, where he basically said, we definitely look back at that Wyatt Teller trade with some regret. And the thing that he brought up was they just didn't really think he was going to progress past what he was with them. Obviously, that changed because he went to Cleveland into a great system and a great offensive line coach in Bill Callahan. And I think he mentioned, we want to be patient with Cody Ford and just let this play out. I'm okay with that because they're not banking on Cody Ford being the guy for this year, right? They're not stubbornly just saying, well, this was our second round pick. We still believe in him. He's got to start, blah, blah, blah. It's he's obviously not starting right now. They brought in Roger Saffold for a reason. They gave Ryan Bates a nice extension for a reason. And they gave Ryan Bates an extension for a reason because they were patient with him and in developing him as well. And they should be. And they've been rewarded with that patience. So I think if they are able to see something from Cody Ford, and again, we've kind of talked about this, if there's anybody that can salvage Cody Ford as a player, literally anything from him, it's probably Aaron Cromer. If they get something out of him, again, Roger Saffold is on a 1-year deal, and if they can get Cody Ford just to an average level and give him a cheapo contract, I think they would call that a successful salvaging of Cody Ford's career.
A huge success.
Relatively speaking. But I think this is, I would be surprised if Cody Ford is just straight up not on the roster in 2022. I think that they're just willing to let this ride out, just go through that rookie contract. If he's not it, then so be it. We'll let him walk. And but if he's something, then we'd like to at least have that for this year. So that's why I'm pretty okay with how this whole offensive line situation looks. I mean, Dawkins, had a rough up and down season last year, getting COVID twice. That was really tough for him. And Saffold is going to be solid, a good stabilizing element for this. Mitch Morris is Mitch Morris. We all love Mitch Morris here. Ryan Bates really, really helped solidify that offensive line last year. And I hope and expect, especially with Aaron Cromer, for him to continue to take a step forward. And Spencer Brown, same sort of thing. They weren't expecting him to play and start right away. He definitely had his struggles. But the athleticism and the aggressiveness and that attitude, that nastiness that you love in an offensive lineman, that was very obvious in his first year. And we all know that Cromer likes his big, athletic, long offensive lineman. So I am very excited to see what he might be able to do with Spencer Brown. So I feel pretty confident overall, and especially that depth. I mean, when they signed David Questenberry, I mean, he's had some pretty good seasons in the NFL. And if that's your one of your backup linemen, you're doing pretty good. Same sort of thing, Tommy Doyle as a backup tackle is probably fine. He struggled to kind of just be on the roster last year. I can't imagine that he'll be at that same level of inability in his second year, but you never know.
Yeah, one could hope.
Yeah.
He catching touchdowns though, so
catching touchdowns. You never know. Tight end 3, Tommy Doyle. But guys like Ike Bucker, I mean, he's coming. I like Ike Bucker, but he is coming off of an Achilles tear,
right? Yeah,
and that was pretty late in the season too, which was really tough for him. And then Greg Mance is Greg Mance. I mean, he's about what you would expect in a backup offensive line. So,
yes.
This position, this whole group, I feel relatively confident in. I think some of it's just going to be a matter of injuries to guys like Saffold and maybe even Dawkins. And just how you handle that shuffling, because they had to do a lot of offensive line shuffling last year, which I think led to a lot of the inconsistencies and instability at that position. But I think if they can just sort of find that right balance, I think they're going to be pretty solid at that group. And that's really all they need to be, is solid, because they weren't good last year for most of last year.
Right. Yeah.
And Josh Allen was still pretty darn good in spite of all that. So,
but they should start Matt Barkley. Just to bring up a few things here, Josh Miller writes, "Does Cody Ford make the 53?" The Trek reviewer, he did not like the Star Wars talk. Ford is not on this team anymore. I don't want Cody Ford starting, right? I will say that right now. I do not think Cody Ford is an NFL starting lineman. He might be their best backup guard. It's Ike Butker. He is their best backup guard because they're not counting Ike Butker because he probably won't be back for week 1. Right. You can't count him. He won't be back for week 1. So, yeah, Cody Ford is at least the guard with the most experience, right? The Bills have tried to make Cody Ford happen in a bunch of different ways. So he has the most experience. And that's kind of one of the things you value in a backup depth offensive lineman is experience. Can, have you played? Cody Ford has played, hasn't necessarily played well, but he has played. So I do think he is making the roster. And then, as we've talked about, you brought it up again, David, if someone is going to salvage Cody Ford, if someone is going to make Cody Ford a replacement level offensive lineman who you can kind of count on in a pinch, it's Aaron Cromer. And Cody Ford is talented enough. He was a 2nd-round pick, for God's sake.
Yeah.
He is talented enough to be a spot starter or, as someone who can finish out a game should a guard get injured. He has that talent. He just hopefully now will get the coaching to be able to turn him into that. Moving on to the defensive line. Again, not really any competitions here per se, but more so how are the snaps going to divvy up?
Yeah, exactly. That was sort of what I want to talk about, because I think that could be really interesting. So there is a ton of players on the defensive line. Mm-hmm. So let's agree, first of all, starters are going to be Von Miller, who did you know he was on the Buffalo Bills? Did you know Von Miller?
I've heard.
On the okay. I wasn't sure who knew that or not. So Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, I think will be the starter week 1, and Ed Oliver, of course, who we love on this podcast, friend of the pod, Ed Oliver, and I think Daquan Jones at one tech. So then behind that, you've got guys like AJ Epinesa, Jordan Phillips, Tim Settle, Bookie Basham, Eli Anko, and Shaq Lawson. It's very interesting sort of trying to figure out exactly how this is all going to work and if all of these guys are actually going to make the 53-man roster. Because, I mean, you look at Shaq Lawson, we all are familiar with Shaq Lawson. We know that he is like a really good, solid run defender and can get some pressure as a pass rusher, but not going to be like a 10, 11 sack type of guy. AJ Epinesa at his best is, I mean, honestly, probably more or less the same. And I kind of wonder, of those two, who's going to be on the outside looking in? And I mean, I would think Shaq Lawson, because he's already been off this team before, and AJ Epinesa's on a 2nd-round rookie contract. I would think, again, when we talk about patience when it comes to players on your roster and particularly guys that you draft, I mean, AJ Epinesa is somebody that's really struggled in his first 2 years. I think the Bills want to be patient with him, but if he struggles again in like training camp or something, it's going to be really tough for him to be on this roster. If someone like Shaq Lawson is going to be that veteran presence where you're like, all right, I know what I'm getting from this dude. What am I getting from you? What I think is going to be interesting though is the rotation on the interior, right? Because in a way, Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle are not that dissimilar from each other.
Right.
They're really big
similar
bodies that weirdly enough struggle to be consistent against the run, but are pretty good against the pass as pass rushers. I mean, Tim Settle had 7 sacks last year. Jordan Phillips, his last year with Buffalo in 2019, he had 10 sacks.
Yeah, double digit.
Yeah. But there's also the fact that you have Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones in front of them. Now, Daquan Jones is here because they need that one tech nose tackle to keep things clean for the second level, particularly on rundowns. I don't think, they didn't bring in Daquan Jones to be a pass rusher. So I'm curious if they're willing to do like 5-man fronts and bring in Rousseau, Oliver, Vaughn, and then also Phillips and Settle, all 5 at the same time. And then, take someone else. I don't know who you would take off the field at that point from the second and third level, but
right.
There might just be certain packages where you're able to do something like that. And I think that would be really, really interesting. Because that's a lot of beef, especially right up the middle. I mean, imagine putting Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle right next to each other. That's a lot of man. That's a lot of man between the two.
It's a fair bit of man there, yeah.
I just think that the idea of that is really intriguing to me. I don't know if that is something that they'll actually do. But the other wild card, I will let you talk in just a second, I promise.
No, this is good. This is good stuff.
But the other wild card here is Bookie Basham, who they drafted to be this inside-out type of player, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he started to get some more snaps down the stretch and looked like he kind of, was getting into a bit of a rhythm down the stretch and looked like
he's in the best shape of his life.
That's what they always say, isn't it?
He's in the best shape of his life, man.
But it seemed like he just felt more comfortable being in the NFL down the stretch last season. So I hope that carries through to this season. And if it does, I think he's a really intriguing player to use just sort of up and down the line and sort of like we always talk about, or the sort of the new buzzword for the 2022 offseason is positionless defense or, something like that. And I think that he sort of falls under that category in a sense, where you can play him inside, you can play him outside, you can play him in a couple different places and feel comfortable with him doing that and feel comfortable in that he's, creating a different style of mismatching. I think that's interesting. So there's a lot of different parts and pieces. And Rousseau also is another guy that you can sort of flip down inside on pass rushing downs. Ed Oliver, we've seen at edge before and be successful because Ed Oliver is a mega baller and he's amazing and I love him. And then you add Von Miller to this whole equation and, he can move around and do pretty much anything he wants because he's Von freaking Miller.
Yeah.
So I think that
he's earned the right.
Right. So truly, I think the thing with this defensive line is not necessarily about like competition for a particular spot, other than I guess Shaq versus Vanessa, but rather it's more like the only guy that really feels like locked into a particular spot and you don't want to move him is probably Daquan Jones.
Yeah.
All these other guys, you can kind of play around with them and see what you can do with them and just sort of unleash them and have fun with them. I think that's what's really interesting with this team, particularly because I don't think they've really had a lot of that in previous years. Someone like Jerry Hughes is someone that he set at that edge because he knows how to do that and is very, 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 very good at it. But I don't know. They never seem to have like a ton of versatility. Harrison Phillips, who we all love. I mean, we all really loved how Harrison Phillips played last year. He was somebody that you put at that defensive tackle position and rotated in. He wasn't somebody that you put at edge. He wasn't somebody that you put in a lot of different spots. So I think that there's just a ton of different things that you can do with this defense line. And I'm kind of curious to see what they'll end up doing with it.
There, and that was very well said. Just the creativity and stuff that they can potentially do with the defensive line. Because Oliver, you can line him up wherever. Basham, Epinessa's kind of sized himself out of that tweener role, right? That was kind of more so when he was coming out. He's lost some weight since then. Kind of lost too much weight, had to put some back on, but he's not tweener size right now. But no, with Boogie Basham doing that, like you said, Von Miller, you can kind of put him wherever you want. With Settle and Phillips, not necessarily the positional versatility, but the play style that doesn't necessarily match the body. There's you can create a lot of interesting fronts, but just talking, I guess, more traditionally, right? How the defensive end room is gonna. I think they might share a room. I don't know though. But how the defensive end position shakes up, how the defensive tackle position shakes up. I might be overvaluing this player, but I think a lot of people are sleeping on Shaq Lawson. I think people are kind of looking at him as like, it's a good story. It's cool that he's back, but maybe he doesn't make the roster. I think he is the third defensive end right now. I think it's Miller and Rousseau on that, first rotation or whatever. With Von Miller, he's probably going to get like 60% of the snaps, between 60 and 70%. And then Rousseau had 50% last year, so maybe like 50 to 55%. And then kind of how are the rest going to divvy up? Lawson, I think, is the third defensive end. And then opposite, you have Epinesa, maybe if Epinesa makes the roster, which I think he will. I could also see them trading him, right? If Basham has a good preseason as a defensive end, if it's not like, versatility that he's shining more from the inside than he is the outside, if he comes out as a defensive end and performs well, I think you're looking at Miller, Rousseau, Lawson, Basham. If, Basham more so just looks like a tweener, then you slot in Epinesa and then you rotate them, here and there. Epinesa and Basham, you rotate them, and then you can have Basham as a tweener as well. And then at defensive tackle, Ed Oliver played 60% of snaps last year, probably going to get a similar percentage to that. Daquan Jones. I see. It is interesting though, because you don't roll with Phillips and Settle as a pairing, do you?
No, probably not. Not like I don't think there's really many sets where you feel comfortable putting Phillips and Settle as your two like interior defensive linemen, and more importantly, like why would you?
Right, you wouldn't.
Like why would you take Daquan Jones and Ed Oliver off the field to put Settle and Jordan Phillips on the field? Like there's not really a scenario where you would feel great about doing that. But the depth, first of all, that those two bring is important. And I think there's also just the fact that they're very similar players, and that's really what it comes down to, right? Is the fact that they're two very similar players with similar strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's those weaknesses that are gonna keep people keep the coaching staff in particular from like saying, hey, let's put them both on the field, or we feel comfortable with them in this particular situation over Ed Oliver, because that's part of it, right? It's like there might be a situation where you're like, let's get some, we want pass rush from the interior, but it's like Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips are not better than Ed Oliver as a pass rusher. That's just not the case at all. So I can't see a real scenario where like you have Phillips and Settle on the field at the same time, where it's just them two.
No, that doesn't make sense. As spin rates here, I think Basham will have a breakout year. So are you doing? It's so interesting given how they rotate. I just don't know. So Oliver and Jones are the main two. And then you're like, what, periodically taking out? Who are you periodically taking out? Oliver? to get Phillips in there back at 3 tech, which is where he shined before, or are you just doing turbo package all the time? Jordan Phillips coming in with Ed Oliver. That's fun, actually.
It would be fun, honestly. I don't know. There's a lot of, again, this is what happens when you have a oh boy. Oh god, sorry.
We've gone too long. We've gone too long.
That's sort of what happens when you have a very talented, well put together team, is you really struggle to figure out the snap counts, the percentages. It's hard. It is. I think that I don't know. It's gonna be tricky. And I don't know if there's a super obvious answer there, but I think that they will figure it out. Which is a very lukewarm take to have, but that's all I got. I mean, I don't know. It's just you gotta just roll with what you think is working, and it may be where like somebody like Jordan Phillips or Shaq Lawson or Vanessa or some combination of those three or whoever, it's just not going to work out the way that they want him to. And if that's the case, like, all right, we have someone else that can work with this. You know,
point that should be made regarding the potential, I guess, roster security of AJ Epinesa, at least when compared to a potential Carlos or Boogie Basham breakout. Epinesa plays special teams, played on 33% of special team snaps last year. Boogie Basham played on 2%. So special teams will probably factor into the ultimate division of play, or not play time on the defensive end, but they're on the defensive line, but makeup of what the defensive line looks like. Okay. Sure. Linebacker. There's a battle again for a guy who doesn't play a lot. AJ Klein was important. I think a lot of people are overstating AJ Klein's importance, especially the last couple of weeks.
Bit.
I've seen a lot of people be like, that third linebacker spot is an important role, and it's like he's on the field for what? Like max what percentage of defensive
maybe
plays?
15%. It was the same sort of thing with like Lorenzo Alexander, although Lorenzo Alexander was easily a better player and a more unique player. But like AJ Klein, like, come on, guys. Come on. Like, he was a very, very average at best linebacker most of the time.
Most of the time. He made a few plays here and there.
Right. And it's just like, relax. Just relax.
Right. Yeah. We've been talking about, are the Bills going to play more base 4-3 this season? I don't necessarily think so. But that being said, Terrell Bernard is a third-round pick who came in. Eric wrote a great article about Terrell Bernard available for premium, the Cover One premium members, if you want to take a look at his potential, what he does. Eric kind of compared him to Matt Milano, saying that a very similar athlete, kind of, similar size, just a similar player that Milano kind of won. Should Milano go down, you have a very similar player, because Milano gets injured quite a bit. So you have a player who can slot in should that happen, or if you do play a little more 4-3, or just any 4-3 in general, you can roll with Edmonds in the middle and Milano and Bernard on either side of him. You have Edmonds patrolling the middle of the field with his whatever wingspan, and then Milano and Bernard potentially flying around the field on either side of him. It's fun. And he's battling with Tyrell Dodson, who is a football player, a special teamer. Terrell Bernard,
there are players on this roster.
Right. Tyrell Dodson, I've interviewed T-Dot. I see T-Dot. I like that T-Dot has embraced the Buffalo community. I see T-Dot quite frequently. Like, I just saw him.
You said it like 5 times just now.
I look, it's a good name. We talked about Bill's nicknames earlier. T-Dot's up there. I just, around Buffalo, some of the Bandits game last year. So, or by last year, I mean last week. So shout out Tyrell Dodson for embracing the community. I don't necessarily think he'll probably make the roster as a special teamer, but he's not the third linebacker per se. That's Terrell Bernard. And I also think Andre Smith is kind of an underrated linebacker. He shined in the preseason last year. But I think it's probably Terrell Bernard over Dotson. Is that much of a position battle to talk about?
I think that I don't think there's anything that's really going to change. I mean, whether or not people like him or not, Edmonds is the Mike linebacker, and that's not going to change. Matt Milano is going to be your starting will. I think that, Bernard is probably going to be Milano's backup. And I think that he will probably be pretty solid if he has to come in. But yeah, I mean, this it's more or less just going to be the same sort of thing we've seen from this team in the last couple of years. Milano and Edmonds together are really good together, and I think that with Daquan Jones in front of them both, they're both gonna play really, really well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that's all going to work out. And I'll be interested in seeing what kind of flashes Terrell Bernard has that makes Bills fans go, should Terrell Bernard be starting over Tremaine Edmonds? And it's like week 4. Mm-hmm. And Terrell Bernard doesn't even have the same like athletic or physical profile that Tremaine Edmonds has, and it wouldn't make any sense at all. But whatever.
I think he can do it. I'll again. You bring up these ridiculous ideas, and I'm like, yes,
you're just like, yeah, no, you're right.
I'm the one saying it. I love it. Give me a couple of months, and I'll start driving that bandwagon. We're not going to talk about safety because there's no position battles to be had there unless the Jordan Poyer situation gets out of hand. But moving on to cornerback.
Shout out Rachel Bush. Anyway, moving on.
Kair Elam versus Dane Jackson. This is a position battle that will take place in training camp, and assuming Trey White is back for week 1. And if he's not, this position battle stretches into the regular season. But let's assume that Trey White is back in time for the regular season, as Brandon Beane seems at least optimistic, realistically optimistic that Trey White will be back. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about it as though he will be back. So Kair Elam versus Dane Jackson. It's interesting because they are two very different players, right? Dane Jackson is kind of the technician, or not the greatest athlete, more technique, I guess, than athlete. And he has that. He's been in the scheme for 2 years now. Started a couple games last year, coming in and facing Kair Elam, the first round pick, who is a great athlete, who ran a 4.340 or whatever, who doesn't know the scheme and to some isn't a scheme fit necessarily. So, David, I think this one's pretty obvious, just based off of where they've picked these two these two respective players. But how do you see this battle shaking out?
If Tre'Davious White is healthy, we're looking at Kair Elam as CB2, and I'm looking forward to it, and it's going to be fun because it'll be nice to have like a legit athlete at CB2 because we haven't had that. And this is not a slight to Dane Jackson, who played pretty well down the stretch, or just when he had to come in and play for Tre'Davious White. Both him and Levi Wallace did a really good job. But neither of those guys brought the same like playmaking ability that Tre'Davious White had. I think that it limited the potential for what that Bills defense could do down the stretch. I don't expect Tre'Davious White to be back by week 1. It might take like a couple of weeks for him to be back, or maybe they kind of, I don't know. I'd be a little surprised if they like kind of gave him like a pitch count or something like that. That doesn't seem like something they would do at that position with someone like Tre'Davious White. So I think that when Tre'Davious White is back, he's going to be back at 100%. So I think it's going to be Elam and Dane Jackson rolling out in week 1. And I think that's fine. I really do. Because like Dane Jackson was perfectly fine and solid for this team when Tre'Davious White went down. And I think Kair Elam, who had to deal with so much crap at Florida with, Dan Mullen and Todd Grantham being Todd Grantham, And just that whole situation was really bad for him. And he's also dealt with injuries before. So I think that just sort of this start with a really great staff and a staff that is, of course, as we've talked about before, just phenomenal when it comes to coaching up defensive backs. I think that this is going to be a really I'm not concerned about cornerback. I think that Elam is going to be really good with this team. I think he's going to catch on very, very quickly. He just seems like a really smart dude who just wants to soak in everything. And I think that, the coaching staff in particular is going to respond to that pretty well. And I think they're kind of going to have to, because he's going to have to be the starter week 1. The real question is going to be if they feel comfortable with him starting as CB1 in week 1, especially when you're playing against the Rams in week 1.
Well, that's, again, people are talking about, is Trey White going to be back? Probably not. My fingers are crossed, right? My fingers are very much crossed for Trey White being back. Taron Johnson's in for a hell of a week 1, but
Taron Johnson, who also switched his number to 7, which is ridiculous. Anyway,
that is your worst opinion. This single digit hate. It is an egregious opinion. They look cool. The single digits look cool. The cornerback situation, are we done talking about like Joe Hayden? Has that ship sailed? Do we not care about Joe Hayden anymore?
I've never cared about Joe Hayden. Let me be very clear. He is only brought in just because, or we've only brought him up just because like they tend to sign some sort of veteran DB before the season starts or before training camp starts or whatever.
Bring back Captain Munnerlin.
Bring back Kevin Johnson.
He retired.
What is Kevin Johnson? Did he really retire?
He's done. He's out.
What?
Lafayette Pitts did not retire though. Well, he may have, but just against his own will. But no, I do think the cornerback situation, it's fun. It's going to be a fun position battle because neither guy, well, Elam has more to lose than Dane Jackson, I think, but Dane Jackson has nothing to lose. Like last year, he came into camp expected by many to push Levi Wallace, and he really didn't. Levi Wallace kind of took that job early and ran with it. But now he comes in, like people are looking at Kair Elam. He's the first round pick, right? He's the shiny guy. Whereas Dane Jackson can just come in and be like, hey, I started opposite Levi Wallace last year for the second half of the season, and I did fine. And you guys have kind of already forgotten about me, written me off. So now I can just come in, do my thing, and if I win the CB2 job, ultimately great. But if not, you didn't expect me to win it anyway. So he has nothing to lose. And then Elam, again, as you said, with the character, the mindset, and just the talent level, I do expect him to come in and be a contributor straight away. However, I don't foresee either of these players being bad. Like, that's the thing. Like, however this situation, however this battle shakes out, it's going to be because one of them beat the other one for the job, which you could say, Kyle, that's how a position battle works. But sometimes it's the lesser of two evils. Whereas with this position battle, I think you are going to have to make a choice. I think Elam has the tools, has more tools to win the job outright. But again, Jackson's going to give him a run for his money. Punter, Matt Araiza,
the main event, the thing we've all been waiting for.
This is what it's been.
Matt Hawk versus Matt Araiza.
Punt God. He's going to win, right? Probably.
I mean, I would hope so.
He would at least win a punting contest.
Yeah.
Versus Matt Hawk. I don't think that would be very close.
Also, can we talk about how both punters are named Matt?
Yeah, sure. What do you want to talk about? Is that? Do you have any other points?
It's just weird, isn't it? I mean, like, what are the odds that two punters on the same NFL team have the same first name? That's a little weird, isn't it?
There might not be precedent for it. We may be in uncharted territory here. This may be the first time in NFL history that a single team has had two punters.
Imagine if they carry both punters.
That
primary holder Matt Hawk, primary punter Matt Araiza.
I've heard crazier ideas. Because if Matt Araiza can't hold, which again doesn't seem like it'd be the hardest thing in the world to learn how to do.
Seem like
but
it.
Corey Bajorquez couldn't do it.
Still can't do it.
You'd like to think that he's put in the work over the years, but you never know. So let's hope Matt Araiza goes to the Pat McAfee punting school, or holding school rather, and he figures out how to hold, because I mean, this shouldn't be much of a battle.
Yeah,
I think that wraps up position battle preview. We can go back to Star Wars talk. What cameos are you expecting in Obi-Wan Episode 1?
I don't know about. So first of all, for those that don't know, the first 2 episodes of Obi-Wan Kenobi will be premiering this Friday on Disney Plus, as Star Wars Celebration Convention will be happening in Anaheim, California this weekend. So there will be lots of things happening. In terms of cameos, I don't think there's going to be anything new that we haven't already heard about. I mean, we know that Owen and Beru are in this. We know that the Grand Inquisitor is in this. We know Hayden Christensen is back as Darth Vader. So,
question about Hayden Christensen being back as Darth Vader. We're not gonna know it's him. He wears a helmet. Is he gonna take the helmet off? I don't want to see ugly Darth Vader.
How dare you? First of all, second of all, I think that. First of all, I don't think that really matters. Well, that was second of all. Third of all, I think something that could be very cool, at least in my mind, is if there's some sort of flashback, right? Where you have cool. Obi-Wan and Anakin during the Clone Wars, and sort of in Obi-Wan's mind, or maybe a vision or something like that. So sort of, I'm always a sucker for a dream or a vision sequence. I think bringing those 2 back for something like that would be kind of cool. So I would be interested in that. The only cameo I would want is Force Ghost Qui-Gon Jinn. So,
that'd be sick.
Yeah.
The Trek reviewer writes Star Wars most overrated TV franchise.
Maybe.
I wonder, does the Trek reviewer have any biases? I guess we'll never know.
I mean, Star Wars is mostly movies, but go off, I guess.
No, he's right. I have not watched any of the animated stuff. The Mandalorian's good. Book of Boba Fett kind of stunk a little bit. Mostly.
A little bit, not a lot of it.
Book of Boba Fett kind of stunk.
The only good parts of the Book of Boba Fett did not involve Boba Fett.
Right, that's what it was. When it pretended to be the Mandalorian for an episode or 2. That was hilarious. This is just Obi-Wan talk. You come back on Friday when we do our Obi-Wan
emergency Obi-Wan roundup.
Where does this
Obi-Wan roundup?
This is gonna. I don't know where it picks up. Right? Presumably,
it's 10 years after Revenge of the Sith, I think, or something like that. Hold on. When does Obi-Wan Kenobi take place?
1, will Luke have dialogue? 2, will he be as whiny as he is in A New Hope? 3, I think I only had 2 points.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, which starts streaming Friday, takes place 10 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith, which is 9 years before the events of A New Hope. So, because in those trailers, we see little Luke, kind of imitating the pod racing, which is fun.
My red flag is that I think Solo is a top 3 Star Wars movie of all time.
Red flag, Kyle. That is a solid green flag if I have ever heard one.
You're a Solo guy?
Love Solo.
Solo's an incredible movie.
Great movie. That might be the most well-casted Star Wars movie ever.
Alden Ehrenreich's incredible.
Phenomenal. It is a crime that man does not have major roles in big movies every day.
I want him to show up. I want him to show up in the movie, in Obi-Wan, which is just a 6-hour movie if you think about it. It
is, which is low key kind of dumb, if we're being honest. I'm not about this whole what we take like this idea for a movie and just stretch it out for 6 hours. It's like, why though? Just like make a movie.
Like I'm excited. I have viewing plans. I went to Disney World earlier this year, mostly to go to Star Wars Land, and I tried the blue milk. It was delicious. So my plan for this Friday is to go to my friend's house, make blue milk with alcohol, because I'm
of course
a borderline functioning alcoholic at this point.
We're all degenerates,
right? Okay. Yes, and just watch. It's gonna be a great time. We'll report back next week with more Obi-Wan talk. Maybe that's when we do the Star Wars episode.
Kyle, did you make your own lightsaber when you were at Galaxy's Edge?
I did not. No, the only money that's not true. The vast majority of the money I spent at Disney World went to alcoholic beverages.
And honestly, that's fair. They are very expensive.
They're very expensive. But hey, it's a great time. Ben writes, "Good evening, boys. First time watching. Great job. I appreciate that,
appreciate
Ben.
It. First time watching, huh? You're in for something."
See, and that's again a bad thing
we
about this
apologize for nothing, by the way. We are who we are.
People click odd for Bills talk. They're like, oh, I'm just gonna sit back, maybe crack open a brew or a water or whatever, just listen to some Bills talk, and you click on, and it's like, what cameos are going to be in Obi-Wan Solo best Star Wars movie? Like, it's incredible. Thank you guys for watching. You can please follow Cover One on Twitter, at Cover One on Facebook. It's at some variation of Cover One on TikTok, Instagram, all those social media
much
accounts.
Everywhere.
Right,
we're kind of everywhere.
Make sure to subscribe to Cover One Premium if you feel so inclined. There you will have access to the Cover One Premium Slack, and you can discuss a wide variety of topics with Bills fans, hundreds of Bills fans in that Slack, talking every day about a bunch of stuff, including the Bills. And, again, as I've said 3 times now, other stuff. Make sure to subscribe to the Cover One Roundup on iTunes, or leave a 5-star review if you would like, or again, just an honest review. That's maybe more appreciated. And I think that wraps it up. David, where can people find you on Twitter?
Right there, at DFAUXY, at DFoxy. Where can the people find you, Kyle?
You can find me watching Obi-Wan. Maybe I'll just, again, I don't tweet anything. Maybe I will just, I'm not going to tweet anything about Obi-Wan. I don't really tweet. I was going to say, I'll just do a live tweet, but absolutely not. I will lose every single follower I have. People will be like, what is going on? Why? The only time he tweets is bad jokes or that he's doing a podcast. And now
live tweeting Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I don't hate it. I don't hate that brand evolution. Yeah. At Kyle Silagyi. Thank you guys for watching. We will talk to you next week.